Thank you very much, Walter and Dominique. When I asked Walter, he said, yeah, I want to do it on one condition, if Dominique can interview me. And now I understand why. No, thank you for this open and personal interview. And although we read a lot of interviews on social media, in magazines and so on, I still learned a lot. And it set also the tone of today, the importance of creativity. So we move on now to our first panel discussion, and therefore we invited Ian King will be the moderator, and it will be a response from education on the question, can fashion save the world? So, as you could experience maybe already, this main room is live streamed. The parallel rooms not, we have no budget anymore, but so in this room everything is live streamed, and also some of the people we invited couldn't join physically, but yeah, then we find a solution. So we made a movie in advance, and some will be also part of the live discussion. So it will be a challenge for the moderator to get it right, and also for the technicians, but be aware if someone is intervening live, then it's important to say, now we are going back to the moderator and the other way around, because then the technicians switch off the echo, otherwise there is an echo. And so, Ian, if
okay,
if
hi.
there is, yeah.
So,
Okay. You have
panels. Now, panels, you either love them or you hate them. Now, I quite like them, so I hope you like them as well. And really, what we're going to try and do for the two panels that follow today is really pick up a few things that Walter was said. Now, in particular, we want to go on two things. Particularly the first one, which is the first panel, is the future of fashion education. And what we heard from Walter is kind of ideals that he had for the Academy. So what we have invited is various important people from the respective institutions in different parts of the world. So if I can invite Fiona. Now, Fiona's from Parsons in New York, so I'd like you to join us in Fiona. And then Barbara is from Rome, but she's just opened up a campus in Milan. And somewhere, I'm not quite sure, we have two people that I can't see, but maybe you can see. One is Yvonne from Ghana. She's online. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna. She's from Ghana, and we also have Zowie Broach from Royal College of Arts, yes, and representing the Academy here in Antwerp is Johan again. So Johan, if you come here as well. So my job really is to kind of invite you to be part of this conversation as well. But I'm going to invite the five of them to give their kind of perspectives of what they see is the future of fashion education at the present time. And Johan, would you like to start? Because it makes sense to kind of show the continuity between yourself and Walter. And then we would then go on to Zowie and Yvonne as well. So the idea behind it, so is to have a cross-section, and then we hear all these different perspectives, and then invite your own ways in which you ask questions, or perhaps disagree. So it's very much an opportunity for you to be part of this conversation. Sorry. I haven't quite got this bit yet, but I'm going to have to speak into the microphone all the time. So my point was, if you didn't hear me, would then be the opportunity for the audience themselves to make comments or to ask any questions, or even perhaps disagree with some of the audience here. So that's what we're going to try and do. So Johan, if I can ask you to start.
Sure. Thank you, Ian. Yesterday I was preparing this panel, and I was trying to order my own thoughts on the subject. And I ended up with a short text which I would like to read as a statement. The title of my text is Shaping the Fashion of the Future and the Future of Fashion, a call for critical elegance, not a manifesto. Recently some manifestos on fashion education have been written, so mine is more a call than a real manifesto. Can fashion change the world? Of course it already does, for more than a century and on a daily basis. The moment we in the morning decide to put some energy in dressing up or down. As creative, conscious and liberal people, we tend to consider fashion as a tool for communication, expression, emancipation and creation, adding to our experience and perception of society and its actors. Read this way, fashion today more or less echoes the idea that abstract art and functionalist architecture radiated in the post-war 1950s. The optimist utopia of individual freedom and the politics of tolerance and pluralism in a liberal, democratic and capitalist society. This, I might say, is the light side of fashion. But by putting continuous and heavy stress on people's lives and on natural resources, fashion also affects the world in a dark way. We are aware of the speedy and greedy fashion industries, their Eurocentric ideology, and their exhausting processes of labor, production, promotion, propaganda, and distribution. We all know that the price we pay for affordable fashion is intolerably high, and that this system is about to cannibalize upon itself. Fast and cheap fashion have a destructive impact on our well-being and on our ecosystems in the longer term. Here, sustainable goals and respect for human beings and the natural habitat seem to conflict with the utopia of the democratization and liberalization of design through total availability and affordability. So, as an individual involved in fashion as a creator, a designer, an educator, a marketeer, a seller, or a user, we all have a double and very ambiguous status. On the one hand, we feel enlightened as being participating in fashion as an exclusive world of beauty and creativity. But by our concrete behavior as producers, distributors, or consumers, we seriously damage the environment and exclude human beings, and sometimes even find the time to feel guilty about that. This brings us to the question of the symposium: can fashion save the world? No, of course it can't, because its light side, it will only make the world a nicer and more beautiful place. I love that dress that you wear. While its dark side plunders resources, damages ecologies, pollutes air and water, and exhausts and excludes people. This ambiguous status of both the fashion world and its actors challenges thinking about contemporary and future fashion education. So we might address the situation with another question. Can fashion education contribute to a better world? Hell, yeah. Seen from its light side, it can develop, stimulate and multiply creative attitudes towards fashion as a wearable, ephemeral, public and performative art. When considering fashion as an art, and I think that's quite important, it becomes a perfect tool to bridge the gap between art and life, the holy grail of the artistic avant-gardes since the end of the 19th century. But unlike the arts that even today still seem to be locked in the art world system, and like music, literature, poetry, design and film, fashion penetrates in our public lives and into our private homes. Education is key for the fashion of the future, both in its light and in its dark sides. At the core of the fashion system, and having the opportunity of operating before and beyond it, fashion education has a huge creative and critical potential. In Belgium, fashion education is part of art education, and art education benefits from the government and not from the market. That provides a great opportunity to form artists and designers in a non-market and non-consumer-driven context. This particular freedom is priceless, and it contains the promise of change. But do we use this potential to the full? So radically enhancing the artistic and creative part of fashion, fashion education will allow critical elegance to provide our life with an extra dimension. I say critical because I believe that fashion, in order to fulfill its function, will have to become more self-reflective about its dark sides and willing to transform its excluding, capitalist and cannibalizing forces into sharing, healing and regenerating ones. But in order to do so, fashion education will have to be able to look the fashion industry in its ugly face and to take position against its destructive habits. This process is already taking place, but how can education make it more inclusive, sustainable and ambitious? To me, this implies, and I'm finalizing, that fashion education will have to become or stay art education. Art education today still benefits from the critical thinking and innovative practices of radical artists of avant-garde movements of the 1920s and the 1960s. Think about the Bauhaus, or Joseph Beuys, or the institutional critique of conceptual art. It is much harder to think of such radical positions in the world of fashion, which has been connected closely with the market. Hence, fashion education, a very recent discipline in art education, always has had at least one eye on the market and the industries. By setting young designers free from the needs and pressures of the current market, they will become makers of the new system instead of followers of the old one. And that is exactly what avant-garde artists did by attacking the establishment of art education, the Academy, and art presentation, the museum. And by inserting these structures with alternatives, they managed to transform them, disruption leading to transition. As a consequence, fashion designers in the making should be seen and treated as artists and receive their program within the context of art education and in close interaction with other art students, which happens to be the cradle of the so-called Antwerp avant-garde and the Antwerp Six. Just like fashion, the art world today struggles with its own Eurocentric frame of reference and the gallery and star system. But since artists attack or question conventions in a more liberated way than designers tend to do, the potential of change lies here. Contemporary art practices also embrace institutional critique, interdisciplinarity, social interaction, collaboration, the commons and community-oriented DIY and DIT processes. And this is starting to affect fine art curricula as well. Reconnecting and mixing fine art and fashion programs might create zones in which both worlds, the art world and the fashion world, can meet, interact and merge. Only this way, the factor of free expression, innovative creation and an inclusive attitude can become central to fashion and therefore extra added value to both our personal lives and to social processes. This finally also implies that fashion education will have to be research-based education. By questioning its own Euro and anthropocentric frameworks, by investigating its blind spots, by pushing and pulling its borders, exploring new conceptual, aesthetic and technological territories, and developing long-term perspective, the creative practice of fashion will be empowered by its critical potential. Together, the creative and the critical forces that are joined in fashion education will give shape to both the fashion of the future and the future of fashion. Not superficially decorating, but consciously designing a new and a better world. And last but not least, this mission should ideally be accomplished in a light, playful and elegant manner towards a critical and radical elegance. It sounds like a new avant-garde. Let's make it work. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. Thank you. I'd like to invite Fiona now. Fiona, if you'd like to introduce yourself, because Johan introduced himself earlier, but Fiona, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and maybe you have a few comments that you'd like to respond to, or in fact, you know, what you'd like to say. I'll leave it to you.
I did not prepare a speech. Let me just say that, so I'm a little overwhelmed right now. I'm Fiona Dieffenbacher. I'm currently the chair of the curriculum committee in the School of Fashion at Parsons School of Design. But before that, I held the position of director of the BFA Fashion Design program for 7 years. So really well placed to speak to, you know, not only will fashion, you know, can fashion save the world, but really your point around can fashion education save the world. But in response to Walter, which was what we were asked to do, it really resonated with your story, I think, across the board and a lot of what you said, but agreeing with other remarks as well, that of course, I don't think it can save the world, but I think as I've been thinking about that question, I feel like before it can save the world, it has to save itself. And we really need to address some of the critical issues that are going on, especially how we teach from a very Eurocentric standpoint. We have to, at Parsons, with Ben Barry's new appointment as Dean, but prior to that, we've already begun the work of looking at social and environmental justice and really decentering whiteness across our curriculum and addressing histories that are very Eurocentric. We need to include Indigenous voices. We need to include Black and brown voices. We have not done that. And so for me personally, as an educator of about 16 years, for me, I have to look at my own complicity in that. And I'll be very honest and very humble in this very public way to say that that's been really difficult for the last year, given where we are, given that what's gone on in America, the fact that, the words of George Floyd, "I can't breathe," resonated across our country. And it took the multiple deaths of how many Black men to wake us up to the issues of the systemic racism in America. And what has that got to do with fashion? It has everything to do with fashion, because we have to address that in ourselves and how fashion's being racist, how fashion has not addressed the issues that we own. We have to own that. So I think as an educator, I'm looking at my own complicity in that, my own lack of knowledge, and having to undo. We've been using that term a lot in the last year. What do we have to undo as educators? What are we complicit in, and what do we have to change in order to move forward in a much more inclusive way, but to really center the voices that we have not centered? So I think, in terms of saving the world, I think, that will go a long way to saving the world for us to really, you think back to Catherine Hamnet, you think back to what was going on back then in London, and I look, phenomenal, like what she was doing. But what, our young graduates are really also now using fashion as a political platform, and they are speaking out on these issues, and they're calling us into accountability, which they need to do because we are complicit and we need to change.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Thank you. Barbara, would you like to say something at this stage? Would you like to introduce yourself and say something? Again, it doesn't have to be a speech or anything like that, but maybe a few comments. That would be really nice.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks for having me in this panel. I'm bad as well because I didn't prepare anything. As many other academics in this field, I comes from the design field, being a practitioner before, and then I've been working for many years for an international institution in Milan. And since a few years, I'm very happy that I have joined Accademia Costuma Moda in Rome, which is a very peculiar place. I think there is a point that we didn't underline until now, which is very interesting, and it makes sense with such an audience, that is about global and local. I think each institution is raised into its roots and into its traditions somehow. The Antwerp 6, I guess, couldn't have born in Milan or in Paris, as well as other reality couldn't have born in other places. And I think that probably the most important thing for us is to support our students to become global players, but in respect of what the territory and the culture of the place is offering them. Coming back to what was said before, that was very interesting, both from Johannes and Ian, and I was amazed by Waldemar Berendock's speech. I think that we have a huge responsibility because our generation is the generation that created the destruction somehow. And now we are putting all the expectations on the new generation. I think we should be a little bit more aware that these are steps that takes a lot of time. I don't think that we all have the truth in our pocket. I think that this is a world, generally speaking, that is evolving at such a fast pace, especially in the last few years after the pandemic, that we do not know what will happen, but we can envision some aspects, and we need to give to our students all the tools. And when I speak about tools, I mean culture, and when it comes to avant-garde, maybe in Italy we are a little bit more perceived as traditional, which is not necessarily the point, but having a huge industry and makers more than brands themselves, we tend to give the students the real in-depth culture of the production and the product and whatsoever in the industry, not because we want them to be just fashion followers, but because we want them, when they decide, if they decide to break the rules, to know which the rules are. And I think that you were mentioning before the opening in Milan. The opening in Milan is an academia that is dedicated to all the area that are around design. Because when we speak about fashion, everybody thinks just of the designers. This is a much more complex world, where there is creativity also in other aspects that are around the design itself, especially nowadays, I feel, with the digital, with the crypto and whatsoever. And we concentrated a lot onto the communication and management aspects as well. And because when I was listening to what Johan was saying about avant-garde, when I think of avant-garde, I think it as a whole, not just design, but also changing some business models, changing the way that fashion is perceived, changing everything. I mean, why should we still think that we need to do 2 collections a year, men's, women's wear, and cruise and whatsoever? Why cannot we think of a different system? I think that the younger generation doesn't have just the responsibility to do sustainable project, local project, kilometer zero projects or whatsoever. They need to think at fashion as a whole. And I think that collaboration and team building might be the solution. Then fashion cannot have the responsibility to save the world as no other cultural form or industry should have, but it can contribute as far as everybody does his part in a proper way. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Barbara. I can't see this part. I'm going to see if we can contact Zowie in London. Hi, Zowie. Are you there, as they say? She's on. Here she is. Hi, Zowie. I can see you now. Good to see you. Zowie. Here today, but there are good reasons. But maybe you would, it would be interesting about the Royal College. And I'm interested to see if you could introduce yourself and your perceptions about, in response to what has been said so far, and what you think is the future for the Royal College. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. It was an amazing conversation between Walter and Dominic this morning, or Walt. I'm Zowie. I'm Zowie Broach. I'm head of fashion at the RCA, and I was co-founder of Boudica, a label that started sort of mid to late 90s. I think a lot has been said that's been amazing so far, so it's kind of hard to add in without kind of being repetitive. But interestingly, listening to the conversation between Walter and Dominic, Walter talked about London being this amazing place of subcultures. And I wonder what that would mean today, to be under the culture. How do we get to that place? This idea of how we find the radical edge, and a place that I think the best of fashion is led us to, and it's so important. And Walter showed that this morning with his work, which was amazing. But this idea of how do we assist that place, support, because the voice and the energy, again, Walter talked a lot about synergies and energies, And I think the energy is going to come from the new generations. They're going to have ideas that it's not for us to have them, obviously. But then how do we assist that when, from my perspective, I see we're also in this very noisy space where all these aesthetics, whether they're aesthetics about what we wear or whether it's aesthetics about constructs of business that we know aren't right, but they're very demanding and they're very noisy. And so my other question to myself, I guess, is whether being within cities is the right place to be. That's not something the RCA are about to do, move to the forest and the countryside, but it would be maybe my dream. And so I think, fashion is a very catalytic practice. It's very mercurial. It's sort of able to sit in between all the different spaces. And I think that melting pot of the subcultures that Walter talked about at that point where he sort of talked about inventing everything themselves. And maybe if we look back to everyone's amazing speeches and talks this morning, from Johan to Fiona to Barbara, everyone's asking for that new reinvention of everything. And that mercuriality and catalytic, brilliant emotional possession that we know comes through the best of fashion is what needs to lead and support and push that forward. So yeah, I hope that assists and adds in, and thank you so much. Back to Antwerp.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you very much. So we've had so far, I mean, a kind of Western perspective, if I'm honest, you know, kind of Western white. So the last presentation really is from Yvonne. Yvonne, I pronounce her name, Ntiamoah. She is at the present time in Ghana, and we tried several times to do various sort of technology and things like that to kind of make it be part of the same thing as Zoe is. But in the end, we decided it's probably better to have this backup in terms of a video. So I'd like to just spend a few minutes showing this video. I don't know if they're ready. And after that, I'm going to open it up for a conversation amongst the panel members if anyone wants to say anything, but also open it up to you in the audience. You can ask the questions to anyone. It may be even Yvonne if we can contact her, but if not, you know, it may be the four of us here, or five, and that doesn't include me. And so can we play? Let's go. Over to you.
Fashion can do change the world. With fashion education, I started off my role first at Radford University, and now supporting the creation of the first creative degree institute in creative fashion, interior design, textiles, all the creative subjects under one roof. And it's actually one of the first institutions in West Africa to be established, supporting creative education. This model is very new and very cutting edge to Africa. Not so to Europe, but to Africa, it really is, as we come from the colonized mindset of the academics of science, maths, and English, educating and creating mainly doctors, lawyers, and very staple careers and professions. So for an African child to go to a parent to say, I want to be a fashion designer or an architect, well, architect has more prestige, if you like, but a fashion designer is usually thought of as a seamstress, and an interior designer or to work in textiles is not highly regarded. So this institution indeed will raise the profile and raise the professionalism of the creative industry and help support people that come out of creative degree programs. We hope that it will spearhead such academic institutions to consider the creative arts as being as academic as science, English and maths, and indeed the theory very much supports the practical that these creative subjects have. And you'll find a lot of our students will start off being very practical orientated, especially in the African environment, being very practical, very craft minded. But once the theory is added, or once they deepen their skills and they understand their theory and they can combine the two. It's very much a growing environment for such individuals, and they are able to develop and to create careers and in fact support themselves, their families. Again, some other examples of some more students, some more creatives who have used fashion, art, the textiles that we find locally within Africa to speak to the world. I mean, because of the digital age and because of the internet, the world is so connected right now, and students are finding influences from all over the world, and they're able to combine it with what's happening within Africa, and they're able to develop and able to sell their ideas and sell their brands to the global industry. But in terms of education, they are now changing the narrative. They are now changing the narrative both online and both in their local communities, because this image would look very foreign to the older generation in Africa right now. But this is the new generation now combining the global sphere and the internet and the Instagram, everything around them, and their local cultural and textual environment, and creating a new niche for themselves. And this has to have an impact on their education. They're on a real journey, a real questioning of society, a real, again, as I said at the beginning, questioning the academia and the environments that they've come from, which only supports established academic careers in medicine and so on. So these students will have a real backlash from their families, not support the sort of supports that they should get within the environments that they grow up. How can our fashion industry or our textile industry support the new creatives, the new mindset, the new growth of creative students that we now have here on the continent? And I think having a new creative design institute like the Design Institute Africa will really help support this new growth that's very much needed. And the fashion education really can lead to something good in the students' lives and in their futures and careers. I mean, this image highlights that the students within Africa have the possibility to compete and grow and compete on a global scale. The only thing that's missing is opportunity. The only thing that's missing is enlightenment and education. And I hope that fashion education will be the new frontier that in fact will be used as a tool to change the world. It really can have a huge voice. A lot of these students describe fashion and their brands and their designs as being a tool for their voice. It's their voice, it's their way of communicating to the world how they feel, how they relate to the rest of the world, and what they want the world. This topic further, and I hope we all have a wonderful exchange of knowledge and exchange of educational background and mind.
I think that's it. Okay, so the college in Africa actually opens at Christmas. They've said to me that they have no books, they have no computers, unless people bring them in themselves, or they bring their books in themselves. They have literally the shell of the building, and that is it. But if you talk to them and you listen to them, they are not deterred at all. They say, no, it doesn't matter. We will invest, we will inform it and create our own institution. And they are so passionate. So don't believe for 1 second that it's less passionate in that part of the world. It's not. So fashion education, can it save the world? it certainly can make it a little bit better. So what I would like to do is to invite the audience really to see if you have any questions, or maybe you need some sort of clarifications, or maybe you see something that perhaps the panel hasn't discussed. Maybe there are parts, for example, you think, but they haven't spoken about this. But what I see fashion education is evolving in a direction that's making much more aware of its societal obligations. And I think that goes back to the question about, can fashion save the world? I think it can in some ways, because it can ask questions about its role in society in a way that perhaps it didn't do in the past. Do we have any questions? We do have some questions, so maybe if you could pass the microphones down there, that would be really good. We have to do it by microphone, unfortunately, because of the live stream. If you would say who you are and your name, please, and then who the question is to, or is it to the whole panel? That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Sure. My name is Michelle Gabriel, and I'm from Glasgow, Caledonia, New York College. So this is just generally to the panel. I'm happy for anyone to answer this. There's a lot of evidence in the expansion of fashion education programs since the year 2000 and the correlation of that expansion to the industry as a whole. By and large, these expanding programs are designer-centric still and relatively traditional. You all have said a lot of great sentiments about how realistic to expect, You all have said a lot of great sentiments, but how realistic is it to expect foundational change from fashion education when it is still designer-centric and when it benefits from the expansion of the fashion industry, which is arguably a significant contributor to the issues of the industry? It still feels very much like lip service to me, while the foundational and fundamental power structures and systems remain.
Good question. I think that's a fair question as well. Does the panel feel that it can change the system? Where does it change, or where does it start from? Does it start from the institutions itself, or does it start from somewhere else? Anyone would like to respond?
I think I might have said something before that was linked to that. I don't think that a single person can change the world, obviously. I think that this generation is very found in the washing and changing the system of fashion, which is a different matter. And I think that to do that, you need to have people aware of the industry processes and the business models as well, not just the design. As I said before, it's not just about designing an equal level. Okay, fine, good. Now what is next? I mean, it's not just that. It's not just about environmental sustainability. It's much more complex, the system itself. So I think that when we think about circular business models, we think about these kind of things. This is the kind of education we need to give and to offer to all our students, not just the management students. Then obviously everybody will have his role. And we also believe that the time of the solo player, that coming from the fashion history in Italy, was one of the big points on which our myths were raised. It's over. I mean, it's about collaboration, about different people. I think that we cannot push someone to do something. I think we must respect one's own opinion, and we can influence culturally our students. But in the other way, on the other way around, I think that we are the ones that are influenced by our students, because they're much more advanced than we think sometimes. And I think that we need to start considering education as a both sides learning process, not just we offering some knowledge to our students. This is over. It's about offering the experience and getting their idea back as they see the future. I don't know if I answer your question.
But I think also what it suggests you're saying is that therefore fashion education has to appreciate it's both inward looking and outward looking now. That kind of change of focus is also a realization of a maturity of fashion education that has to appreciate the kind of contribution, has to change. But at the same time, it's still necessary to have that particular artistic flair. We can't lose that. But at the same time, we have to capture the responsibility it has. Anyone else like to respond?
Just briefly, yes, I understand what you're saying. I mean, it often does seem like lip service. So it's a complicated answer. I'll be really candid. Faculty hold a very interesting position in the university system. I mean, increasingly, we hear this term that we're service providers. I don't know if this is as bad as it is in the US over here, but we used to have authority in the academy. That's a fallacy, to be honest, if we want to get some real conversations here. So, when we talk about faculty's power to change the system, it's extremely limited because, let's face it, institutions are run by more and more and more administrators who don't have the expertise and knowledge that we do within the actual disciplines that we are teaching and we're delivering. So that's the gap that we are the space that we're living within. And so we have this vision of our pedagogical vision, how we want to deliver curriculum, what we want to deliver for our students, but making that happen is really challenging. But I think at Parsons, we are really keen to absolutely speak truth to power and to really, really hold our administrators and upper administration to account in terms of what we want to do and how we want to change things within the curriculum. We are establishing a School of Fashion vision group, which is fully inclusive, listening to the voices of our alumni that have said, you have to do some things differently, a lot of things differently. So they will be at the table. Students' voices will be at the table. We've made real efforts in the last year. So I chair the curriculum committee. We have students on our curriculum committee. So we're leveling that sort of hierarchy where it's this sort of leadership that, students don't have a voice. It's we are trying to bring in those voices into spaces where they haven't been. And like Barbara said, it is slow and incremental change, but we have to, like the journey of 1,000 steps has to start with that first step. And we recognize that a lot of our efforts will look performative at the beginning, and they may look like they're lip service, but they will, over time, as we keep doing them, they will show that we are intent on really making change. And then the last thing I'll say is that when I was director of the BFA, we recognized, to your point about the designer, like churning out this, designers or the same type of designer. And we recognized we had to shift that. So we diversified the program across pathways. So we do have collection, which is your kind of core traditional, design track. And we have fashion product, which is broader than just accessories, is anything you want, anything that could be an accessory to the body. Materiality, which is again broader, in terms of you want to like head into textiles, head into kind of a non-garment space. And then we have fashion systems, because to Barbara's point, we recognize we want students to have a space to be able to redesign the system for themselves and really investigate that. So, I mean, it could include garments, it could include anything. And our thesis space has just completely opened up. So students can propose whatever they want. Like I'm technically teach collection and thesis and BFA, but one of my students last year he's in an incubator at the moment. He's developing NFTs and meta, the metaverse, and I don't even understand half of that, but he's doing that as supposedly a collection student. So it's a space, we have to create, structure for curriculum, but truly students can do whatever they want, which is really exciting and not where it was 5-10 years ago, et cetera. It's moved along, a lot. I think maybe sort of the perception of schools and the reality is also challenging. There's like a facade and there's a sort of a whole legacy there, but it is shifting, and hopefully that will start to show over time.
Zoe, did I see your hand up in the air? You wanted to say something? Over, I think. Hang on 1 second, we've got to click over the different system. Okay, try again.
God, it's so weird because I can't hear you, so I feel like I'm talking to myself. Yeah, I mean, I feel really passionate about what's coming out of the RCA. I don't feel it's lip service. I definitely think there's this struggle between the practical and the poetical. I think that's whether you're creating the constructs of education, whether you're the student or the staff member. And for students, they also have the practical and the poetical. So that space in education, that space that they define for themselves is very important, that they really kind of dive deep and kind of avoid some of the practicalities, because we know the moment they leave that the real world right now is really hard. And ultimately the kind of balance that we even saw with Walter this morning, that all designers, independent designers, will tell you, that kind of consistency to remain financially stable is really tricky. And so I think a lot of students do feel like they have to be drawn back to the industry. But I think when I think about the Royal, I think about Laura, who for her final collection, she made nothing. She became part of Extinct Rebellion, was an activist. I think of Alice Robinson, who did a whole project on sheep 11458 and looked at the whole kind of routine about working with one animal and understanding all those elements. I think there are students who are not just being designers, and they are going out into the world and creating, being part of new emerging fields like Alice Potts around bio. We just had an amazing student, Zongbo, who's just been presented on Piccadilly Circus, where they did a whole digital presentation called Dilemmas for Earthlings, talking about planet, talking about our relationship to animals and our mental health. There are students coming out through education who are not just going into the system as it exists, and internationally and across, they create a strong network that creates great role models for other students to follow. And I to be really good here and not just feel that we're getting it wrong. And again, it does take time, and that's about creating something really strong between all those kind of new individual phenomenal voices. Thank you, Antwerp.
I think there was another question, or at least one or two questions, I think. So, yes, please. And you can say who you are, please, and who the question is for.
Sure. Thank you, Ian. I'm Elisa Palomino, Fashion Print Lecturer, Central St. Martin's. And I'm wondering a little bit about what Fiona was talking about, the Eurocentric perspectives. And this is just to everybody, but I'm really, really interested to see what are we doing as educators, because I've been working with many indigenous communities for the past years, and my question is how, for instance, in America, educators, we are educating ourselves about the indigenous communities that we teach to, and also other communities, like I'm talking about institutions in England and also in America, where are so expensive and hardly, people can't access them. Are we providing some grants? I've seen amazing weavers in Tibet, Alutiiq beaders in Alaska, kids with so much talent that they would never ever would have the access to our universities. Unlike Antwerp, where you just need to be extremely talented and you just need to fee relatively low fees. So what are we doing as institutions about money, and what are we doing about educating ourselves in other people's culture? Because what I'm seeing is that our students, they just don't want to stay in London or Paris. They want to go back home and bring what they've learned to their own communities. So what do we know about them and how we can help them in this respect? Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Fiona, it has to be you, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Elisa. I can see your flower. I think we just need to, we're centering their voices in terms of, right now we're launching a new course in Indigenous fashion taught by Native. So we need to have those voices in, they're authentic. I can't teach that class. I would never assume to teach it because that's not my place. So I think we are intent in terms of even getting to the language within our hiring practices. We've just spent a lot of time looking through what it's actually saying in that job description, because we recognize if we just go with the typical job description where we're looking at, terminal degree or experience in fashion in a traditional way, that's going to exclude a whole host of people that have not come through the traditional academic system and meet those requirements, right? So those job descriptions are now really reimagined in terms of accepting and actually seeking and centering the language of those hires around folks that are outside of that system, and that will bring those voices in. So I'm part of a search committee, so we're really keen to be centering those goals and looking intentionally for those people to bring into our community so that they can have a place to really start to shift that. In terms of training, I've personally making it my personal project to continue to inform myself and do workshops. And I think that's on all of us individually. Institution, we are providing workshops and training for faculty as well, our adjunct faculty that are with us. But I think that's on us in terms of like a lifelong goal to be educating ourselves on knowledge beyond our own my own white-centric, Eurocentric vision of life, really. I just need to understand, much, much more than I do. And that's going to be an everyday commitment to do that work.
But I think also, the question refers to pricing. The cost of some fashion courses have got so enormous now. The gap between some of the higher priced ones, and I look towards Parsons there, I'm afraid, as one of the highest charging institutions in the world on fashion. And we look at Antwerp, for example, which is relatively generous, in terms of pricing. So, where's it going to go? Because, the question said, there is real talent there. And unless you've got the money to go to these institutions, you can't go. So, but it's a cultural thing. We're almost perpetuating this economic model. That actually could be the downfall of the talent that can exist. So what can we do to kind of reverse this kind of trend? Because it's not going to stop. These institutions like Parsons and LCF and other places which I am aware of, they are creating the problem because they're charging higher and higher and higher fees. They're looking at these people not in terms of their talent, but really in their ability to pay. And that really doesn't help the industry at all. It's now, and I'm going to be critical here because when I go to LCF now, I see whole groups of people who are there because they're rich, not because they have the talent. So what I'm saying, is what do we do about this? What can we do to change the system to make it so that the talent comes to the surface? Because Antwerp's done it, and they will continue to do it because they get that support. But across other parts of the world, they don't get it. So what do we do?
I think that you're right, obviously.
Sorry.
It's always about business models, you see, whatever angle you take. I think we must also underline that there are private institutions and public institutions. Yep. I am one of the blessed ones because I did my master's in Italy through a scholarship, which otherwise I wouldn't have been able to afford. So I'm a big sponsor of that. I'm feeling really into that. But then you have to consider that, for instance, I can talk about my country. Besides universities, all fashion schools are private.
That's true.
Do not get any support. So we live off the fees of our students. Obviously, what we can do, scholarships, merit scholarships for both the 3-year of the BA and for both all the masters. We offer, probably my colleague Edwin Roberts, which is our international director of education, better than I do, can number the quantity of scholarships we offer. But that's the only way we found until now to support.
And do you see a system where the scholarship system could become, for example, much bigger and broader and maybe even finance from industry itself?
We do that. Okay. It's pretty tough, especially after COVID. It has been a little bit more difficult. We get partial or total scholarships. For instance, we have a course on fabric innovation design where we get like 6 out of 15 students are full scholarships offered by the companies. So this is a huge help for us to search for the best students from all over the world. And to attire talents is not just an ethical aspect of every school, but it's also strategic to have good students that then will pursue good careers.
It's in the best interest of this industry to find the most talented students. Johan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I also want to add that Antwerp is not like generous. We just have a different model.
Yeah, exactly. Huh?
We're government funded, publicly funded, and of course we can organize our programs and hire our staff by combining the fees of students with the government funding, and that allows us to seem generous. That's a whole culture behind funding and public education that runs completely different in the United States and Europe and Belgium, I think. It's historical as well, historically grown this way.
Oh, sorry, yes. Zowie, you would like to say something. Can you pass it over to Zowie, please?
Yeah, I think the money side is kind of key. And I think, as Barbara said, scholarships are crucial. In the UK, it's now no longer government funded, which is why stupidly we chose, instead of a community to pay for education for many, it has to be the individual who pays. So it goes back through politics, it goes back through capitalism. And so when we look to scholarships, and I think they're definitely really working on that, a lot of the Royal, and that's all about inclusivity and international, because of course there's also the difference between whether you're a home student or an international student. And so to make that work, I think we do need relationships with industry, but a little bit going back to what we have to be careful of the contract, you know? And so I think it's looking possibly at different areas, particularly the technology giants, where they're making a lot of money out of our, us. And so to some extent, I think we have to look to that. And I think colleges are very aware, just generally is what I can gather across all my different colleagues from different schools, that needs to be supported from not just within the school. It's just not possible. And so the other thing, talking about the inclusivity, Ramagaru, who's the amazing head of leader at Helen Hammond, he's created this kind of 4-point. So it's about ageism, ableism, gender, and race. And I think that, again, coming through everything and everywhere, makes for such an amazing community. When we come back to what is our future, the future comes through them. And so through being enabling all of that, plus then we need those relationships to get scholarships. And I think lastly, maybe we need to not work so separately. Maybe also, we talk so much about kind of collaboration for the students, but maybe we don't collaborate enough as universities and create that kind of network across. Maybe that would also be a powerful way forward. If we want to change everything, we also need to maybe be more kind of porous with each other. Thank you.
Zowie? I think you're right. I think institutions should cooperate more, because a lot of institutions could share resources, and it could be a much more effective way of sharing resources and sharing maybe some of the kind of issues in terms of staff and things like that. I think I'm going to squeeze in one more question. If everyone's got a different kind of question for the panel. Is there anything online? No. So anyone who's got a question, please? We have one more.
Hello.
Hi, can you say who you are, please, and who the question's to, please?
Yes, my name is Zowie. I'm come from Taiwan, and I am now the master's student from Artis University of Arts in Netherlands. My question is that I have been researching decolonizing fashion, but I think it's a more like an open question to everyone, that the language we're using to describe, if we are aiming to decolonizing, move away from Eurocentrism, then, but maybe everybody, even the educator, student, maybe should think about the language we are using to describe the non-white people. And I don't think there's a better word to be specific about any nationality, everybody's identity, because the heart, even the word BAME, I think it's also very discriminating, excludes a lot of people outside the world. And I think also about this conference that of course is held in Europe, but if we want to move away from Eurocentrism, maybe it should be more like including more other university outside Europe. And I really like what Yvonne was mentioning in the video, that creating their own, letting students to create their own niche, I think is very important to take into account that other countries, and we need to stop seeing Asian as just one place called Asian, and also African, just Africa, but we never talk about Europe. We do, but we know how many countries there are in Europe, but we seems like seeing Asian and African just one continent. I think that's the open question for everybody to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good question. Again, I should say that these panels are always restricted by the number of people on it. We cannot respond to everything in this way. So we raise the issues. It's a very, very good point that you raised there. How we can do that, of course, by including other kind of collaborators from different parts of the world. This particular conference series has been all different parts of the world, including Asia and Vietnam and China and so India. So I think we the series recognises that. So please understand that. But it's a question mark about how we change our vocabulary and how we use that to make it much more inclusive. One of the reasons why this conference is free is to make it inclusive, so that people can come regardless of their background, regardless of their interests. It's very much about bringing people in and allowing people to be part of this conversation, because it's you really that these events are for. We want something that is relevant and vital and that will invest in the future. I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to say anything else. It doesn't look like. Zoe, do you want to say something? I think so, yes. Can we put Zoe back on again, please?
Yeah, sorry. I just think language is a really powerful thing to discuss because there's this amazing essay that I'm going to reference later that was written by Hawaiian, Cray, and Lakota, but they're talking about AI. And it was such an amazing essay to read that really shifted my thinking about what AI was, because it was going through their use of language and how they relate to the world, what the world means, what AI means around the word community. And I think there's just a lot of semantics around the industry, collection, and just everything. That is a really powerful starting point at how the words we use and the shift of all of that new space, I think is also a really amazing area for us to work together across age, cross up, cross down, to begin to understand how that might establish this kind of new space, these new disciplines. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. I'm going to say...
Ian, is there still time for one question?
One question.
Yeah, last one.
Yes, I can see right at the back. If it's a short question, yes, because we're hungry.
Short.
We're very hungry.
Hi, it's short, and I think it's a different one. I'm Jacqueline Fulton. I'm from National University in California. My question is, we're talking a lot about fashion education within your programs. I wondered whether you could speak about what you're doing to educate the public about sustainability and responsible fashion, because a lot of young people or older people, whatever the age or whatever ethnicity, race, background, country, are such avid consumers of fast fashion and don't understand the issues involved that you're talking about in your programs. But are you involved in general education in your universities? And what kind of things do you do for outreach to educate the consumer? Because if you don't change the consumer, you're not going to change the system.
Good question. Good question. Does anyone like to respond? It looks like Barbara is.
Well, I don't have an answer, to be honest. Okay. I was trying to pass it to her.
It's your turn.
No, okay. I mean, we do not do general education as an institution in Italy, in Accademia, Costuma, and Moda. But to be honest with you, I have the opposite feeling, and it's a generational issue as well. I can see that all our students joining us are already very conscious about all these issues, and they want to overcome the problem. The problem we have is that sustainability, as inclusion, diversity, and other words, have been suffered somehow of a little bit of emptiness, too much used, overused. I can't stand these words anymore, to be honest with you, but we need to find a new phrasing, because they've been used for greenwashing and washing overall, you know? So I don't think that we really need to educate consumers. We need to change the system from the inside, as far as the new consumers are already pretty aware of what they want and how they want it. Just to make an example with the food industry, I don't know how it works in other countries, but in Italy we are very aware, and now people are reading very attentively every single step of the product they are going to eat. And I think that the same system is getting to fashion, as far as the general law will allow to put all the tracing, and the blockchain might help a lot in that, of each single product, just for instance. Just one last thing. because sometimes I tend to be a little bit politically incorrect because I'm tired of all this politically correctness that sometimes it's empty. No, I'm obviously I'm kidding. But also when we talk about sustainability as the solution for everything, sustainability is one part of the big issue, because the society is in transformation, and sustainability often is perceived as something that rely only to environment, which is much more complex than that. Sustainability is about environment, it's about social and ethical, it's about finance, because we need to remember that there is no business that can be run just for charity. It has to work in all its aspects, and this is what we need to work with our students toward. And also, speaking about fast fashion, it's easy. I agree with you. Let's open up our eyes also to what is not fast fashion, that sometimes it's following the same rules of fast fashion, just putting more charge on their products. So I think we need to deep when we talk about these kind of things with our students, and we had a lot of discussions about these kind of things with them. I don't think it's our role to educate the consumers. I think that the consumers might ask the industry to act in a different way.
I wanted to add also that I noticed in the last years that artistic research has provided students and staff with more dimensions of criticality. So it's not only about fashion and art education, but also inserting research within education, opening up new dimensions and questioning and investigating frameworks and situations. So I strongly believe that inserting more criticality in fashion education systems also allows for a bigger awareness and also for touching upon issues in society. And I think there's a long way to go there also. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm going to stop it now because I think we all deserve a break. So thank you very much. I'd like to thank the panel, Fiona, Barbara, Johan. I'd like to thank Zowie online. I thank Yvonne in absentia. And finally, thank you, Walter and Dominique, for your contribution earlier. Lunchtime. Okay. I'll be back at what? Oh, sorry, you did this.
Yes, thank you, Ian. Also, I thank the panel and Walter and Dominic again. Yes, something else. We tackled a lot of serious issues, problems already this morning, but it has also been said that we need to do it also in a playful way. So therefore, those who had a sandwich and want to play on the floor, under this floor, so one level beneath, yeah, there is a workshop, a kind of play around fashion. So you have to go and see what it is. And some people maybe already want to go to the exhibition. It was also mentioned by Johan. So we are very proud that, and very grateful also that a lot of people from the network sent some projects around the topic Can Fashion Save the World? So artistic projects. And you can visit it, and it's an exhibition in the Winter Garden of the Academy. So where is the Academy? It's very close. You go out to the street, to the, Prince Street 13. You go out and you go to the right. And if you continue, you see a big space opening with, also there are works in there. So you go that side and you enter the building, and then at the left side, one of our volunteers will guide you. So then you can already enjoy the exhibition. But the exhibition will be open the 3 days, long, and also this evening after the last panel discussion, you can go there. But always under guidance, otherwise the door will be closed, I think. So enjoy your lunch and see you at 1:30 for the paper sessions. Thank you.